So we'll get our discussion started with opening remarks from General Scaparrotti. Sir, thank you, and please take the mic.
Thank you, JD. And it's an honor to be here, particularly with JD, Vince, Sean Kramer, Steve, again, to talk about this important topic. I think JD, and once again, thank KDVA for putting this on. I'll start with, just kind of a review of how I viewed the UN command as I came in initially and taking command. And it resonates with what Sean Kramer just laid out. As I looked at it and the commanders before me, it was somewhat in the background. All of its positions were dual-hatted. It was essentially the third of the three commands that, while being manned predominantly by US personnel, was basically the third in order of their duties. But in short order, I began to realize, as Sean said, the power of these 18 nations, not only military, but I'm talking about their ability to influence through economic, diplomatic, informational powers. And secondly, they were very interested. Many of the ambassadors of the sending states provided good advice, were very interested. And over time, I decided it was probably time to begin a revitalization, as we called it during that time, of the UN command. We wrote a white paper. We began to talk with those sending nations ambassadors and the Republic of Korea about what it was and what it was not, importantly, and then laid out a plan to, quote, revitalize the UN command. Began meetings of the ambassadors on a regular basis, a meeting of the command. We began to populate the command so that it wouldn't be dual-hatted. They'd actually have key positions filled with officers, international officers that could execute the duties of the UN command. So we just basically started that revitalization. Vince picked it up and took that vision a great deal further. And I commend him for the work that he and his staff did in filling that out. And I think I'll just stop there and let it go to questions as the real vitalization of the UN took place under Vince's command.
Thank you, General Scaparrotti. General Brooks.
Well, good evening and good morning to everybody, and especially it's a great delight to be with such great friends and colleagues that I've known for so many years on this panel. My thanks, as always, to KDVA, Korea Defense Veterans Association, for arranging this webinar and several others as well. These have been excellent webinars, and coming to KDVA is a great place to get information if you really want to understand the situation in Korea and hear it from those who actually lived it. I appreciate the comments by Sean Kramer and by Scap on what came before. And it's really important to understand that we really can't operate in Korea without an understanding of history. And that's been really well laid out. And I thank both of my colleagues for laying it out so well. In many ways, each one of the commanders coming into command, as Sean mentioned, have had to recognize some of the limitations, shortfalls, and challenges associated with UN command, the oldest of the three commands, but in many ways, as has been described, the least understood, but in some ways, perhaps the most important. And we saw that emerge in the period of 2016 to 18 while I was in command. Without a doubt, we were picking up on General Mike Scaparrotti's vision and his initial efforts to, as we did call it then, revitalize, to bring back to greater life the United Nations Command and its role. And indeed, as time went on with the significant missile and nuclear activity that happened in 2016 and 17, it was evident to me as the commander of UN Command and the other two commands that we had to really understand the difference between one command and another, what the authorities were, what the reporting chains were, and each is different. I won't go into that in detail, but especially the important role of trying to preserve an armistice, which today is 67 years old. And it's an interesting day for us to do this, given the critically important role of UN Command in preserving that armistice for these 67 years. I know that General Abrams just spoke up in Panmunjom just a few hours ago. And one of the comments that he made, as I understand it, is that really nothing contributes more to the security of South Korea than the will of the international community to implement the armistice. And that has been an unchanged fact for now the past 67 years. Great and important point. It's the armistice that has prevented a resumption of open war. And there have been some close calls. And Sean talked about that period in the late 1960s and leading up to 78, but especially from 66 to 1969, where there was open warfare again, limited in scale, but some call it the Second Korean War. The UN Command has conducted operations through the years to try to respond to different things that have emerged in the conditions of armistice, but the objective has always been to restore a cessation of hostilities until a lasting peace agreement can be arranged. That, ladies and gentlemen, is really the thing we've all been waiting for. General Mark Clark, as he signed the armistice, expressed his dissatisfaction that we shouldn't be happy about what's happening because the objective was peace, and that objective has not been fulfilled, still hasn't been fulfilled. 67 years of armistice preservation. So just a couple of thoughts about UN Command as we embraced it. And we saw that there was going to be an increasing role for UN Command with its unique authorities. First, to prevent the resumption of hostilities. That was always the objective for UN Command, and it was the day-to-day activity, whether it was ensuring that the two sides, North Korea and the UN Command, more specifically South Korean forces and US forces, were in compliance with the armistice agreement. And we did that with the help of a great group of countries, the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission. I want to shout out to them. I know a few of the veterans of those Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission experiences are on the net with us today, and I appreciate them being with us. But the countries of Sweden, Switzerland, and initially Poland and Czechoslovakia, those four countries were really supposed to ensure that the two sides were living up to their agreement. And so with this collective body, we worked on trying to preserve that armistice. But it was clear that as the situation with North Korea was changing, a greater role for UN Command might be called beyond the preservation of the armistice. First, the UN Command can enable dialogue by granting access, by allowing crossings, as the armistice agreement has specified. The authority to allow any crossings of the military demarcation line between North and South Korea belongs to the Military Armistice Commission. And in the South, that's administered by United Nations Command. So it enabled dialogue, and indeed that became critically important. And as Sean Kramer has highlighted, it also was and still is the home for international commitments. When a third country, other than the United States and South Korea, commit capability, whether it is for peace, yet to be fulfilled, or whether it's for war, long prevented, then that place for them is UN Command. And this is particularly important since 1978, with the establishment of the Republic of Korea US Combined Forces Command. That's a binational command. It's an alliance command. Other countries are not part of that alliance. It is the warfighting command now, as UN Command was in 1950 to 1953. But now it's Combined Forces Command. And UN Command provides support to it in the form of international commitments and international legitimacy if something were to resume. And the ideal outcome, of course, would be peace emerges. And there may be a role for military forces in creating and enforcing peace, just as there was a role for military forces in the Military Armistice Commission to establish the conditions of armistice so many years ago. And that's important to understand. The relationship with North Korea is fundamentally a military relationship. The document that has governed the interactions for these 67 years is a military document. And the role of a military command in helping to break that down, to go from armistice to peace, which requires many steps, called for some command to still be able to do that. And that was United Nations Command. And so these three roles, preserving the armistice, enabling dialogue, and providing a home for international commitments, has been our focus ever since. And there were vital roles, and I know we'll talk about that as we get into this. So I'll stop right here with those words of introduction. And thanks, JD, back over to you.